Hey everyone, this is Miss Baker. In this video, we're going to talk about how you would find the x-intercepts from a factored form or vertex form equation. Remember, in the last couple weeks, we talked about how the x-intercepts are the same thing as roots, zeros, and solutions, and we talked about how to find them from looking at the graph. They are the points where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So we're looking for 2 points, but we're trying to do it today without looking at the graph and only looking at an equation. In this video, we're going to talk about how to find the x-intercepts from factored form and from vertex form. First, we'll do factored form. Remember, last week we talked about how to find the y-intercept, and the way we did that from an equation is we set x equal to 0, or we plugged in 0, and then we simplified to find the output value. Now, to find the x-intercept, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to set y equal to 0, and then we're going to simplify. And remember, y is the same thing as f of x. All right, before we can do that, we have to use this thing called the zero product property. And that tells us if we have two numbers that are being multiplied by each other and the answer is 0, then either the first number has to be 0 or the second number has to be 0. Or it could be the case that both numbers are 0. But because of this, we know that both of these or one of these has to be equal to 0 for this to be true. So when we go to look at a factored form equation next, you're going to see two things being multiplied by each other. And what's going to happen is we are going to set that equation equal to 0. Remember, we're going to change y or f of x to 0. And then that means that either this one has to be 0 or this one has to be 0 or both of them can be 0. So let's see what that looks like with a real example. All right, for this first one on the left-hand side, we are going to find the x-intercepts. So remember, the first thing we do is we set f of x equal to 0. Next, we know that either this whole thing has to be 0 or this has to be 0 or both. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that property and we're going to use it to separate this into two separate equations. So we're going to say x minus 1 is equal to 0 or x plus 6 is equal to 0. Then we're going to solve each of those equations separately. So what I'm going to do here, this is an equation to solve for x. I'm going to do the opposite of subtracting 1, and I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And when I do that, I get 1 is equal to x. And remember, our y value was 0, and now we know our x value is 1, so I can write that as a point, 1 comma 0. And then we're going to do the same thing for this side. Subtract 6 from both sides because that's the opposite of adding 6. And then we see that our x value is negative 6 and our original y value, or f of x, was 0. Okay, so now what happens if the factors look a little bit more complicated? What we can do is the same process. We're first going to set the equation equal to 0. So change f of x to 0. And we're going to separate it into two equations. We're going to say 0 is equal to 3x minus 6, and then 0 is equal to x plus 5. And then we're going to solve them as if they were separate equations. So for this one, I know that I want to add 6 to both sides first. And then when I do that, I get 6 is equal to 3x. And now this is 3 times x, so I'm going to do the opposite operation, and then that's divide by 3 on both sides. And when I divide by 3, I get 2 on the left-hand side. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so we don't even have to write that. And now we know x is equal to 2. We remember our y value is 0, and now our x value is 2, and this is our final point for this equation. And then we do the same thing over here. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and then write that as a final point. So take a screenshot of this if you want to have that. But what's nice is we don't have to just guess. We can also check on Desmos. So we can take this equation or this equation, we can type it into Desmos, and we can make sure that our answers are correct. You'll notice that the point 20 shows up right here. That's an x-intercept. And the other point, negative 50, shows up here. So now we know that we are correct. Now, what happens if the equation is in vertex form? We cannot solve it the same way as before, but the core idea is still the same. The first thing we do is we set f of x equal to 0. And now we're trying to solve this equation to get x by itself. So we're going to undo these operations. So I'm going to start with the negative 32, and I'm going to add 32 to both sides. When I do that, I get 32 on the left-hand side, and I'm left with everything else on this side. And now the next operation I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this thing by 2. And I'm dividing it by 2 because I want to get rid of this 2 out front, and we're multiplying. Dividing is the opposite of multiplying. So if I divide both sides by 2, 32 divided by 2 is 16, and then 2 divided by 2 is just 1, which we don't have to write here. Now we have this equation. I want to get rid of this power of 2. Remember, the opposite thing of squaring, or the power of 2, is to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of 16 is 4, so I'm going to write this as plus or minus 4, because it could be positive or negative. And then on this side, we've basically used the square root to cancel out the power of 2, so that has disappeared, and all we're left with is the x minus 3. Now this is probably weird because we have the plus or minus, but what that means is it could be positive or it could be negative. So we're going to separate those into 2 separate equations. We're going to say the one case where positive 4 is equal to x minus 3 on this side, and the other case of it being negative, we're going to put that on this side. So negative 4 is equal to x minus 3. And now we have 2 separate equations and we can solve them separately. So we'll start with this one. We're trying to get x by itself, so I'm going to undo this operation and I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And that gives me negative 1 is equal to x. And then I write that as a point. And then on this side, we do the same thing. Plus 3 on both sides, and we get our point. And again, you can check that on Desmos to make sure. We're not going to go through this whole one, but I will put the answer up so that you can see it. Works the exact same way. All right, so make sure you check your answers on Desmos. They should match and you should be able to see those. If they don't, something went wrong and we got to figure it out. All right, today we have talked about how to solve from factored form, how to solve from vertex form, and then in the last video, or in the next video, we will talk about how to solve from general form. So make sure you take out that practice assignment. Week 4, you should be able to do the whole front page after this video and then watch the other video to do the second page. Have a good day.